Okay, so picking up where we left off, biological diversity is traditionally divided into three domains. Domain is a taxonomic division or category in biology, and all organisms share some things in common. That's the unity. But as we start to try to group organisms into groups, we focus on what they have similar to each other but different from other groups. So the first division, there are three domains, and the first one is called this is no particular order. The first one is called domain bacteria, and then you have domain archaea, and I pronounce that with a hard CH, archaea, and then domain eukarya. And so these are the three domains, and I want you to write this down. Domain bacteria, these are prokaryotic organisms. That means they have no nucleus. They have DNA, but it's not surrounded in a special compartment inside the cell. So it's just in the DNA is in the cell. And the bacteria are all unicellular. One cell is the whole organism. Then we have domain archaea. Those organisms are also prokaryotic and unicellular. However, there are differences between the bacteria and the archaea that we are not going to delve into right now. But both groups, in terms of their whether they're prokaryotic or eukaryotic, they're both prokaryotic, and they're both unicellular. In other words, all the organisms in both categories are unicellular organisms. We've never found an organism, there's none that exist that we know of, that are prokaryotic cells but multicellular organism. For whatever reason, that never evolved. But in domain eukarya, as you can tell a little bit from the name, the eukaryotes fall into the eukarya. So all the cells in the eukarya have a nucleus, have a special compartment that encloses the DNA. And then in the domain eukarya, some of the organisms are prokaryotic, some of the organisms are unicellular, and some of the organisms are multicellular. So they're all eukaryotic cells, but some of the organisms are made up of cells made up of one or more cell, made up of more than one cell. And so that would be multicellular. So in the domain eukarya, you have unicellular organisms, and then you have some other organisms that are multicellular. This picture, I actually don't think it's very helpful because I don't think these are great pictures. This is a cluster of cells that are from domain archaea, but you can't even hardly tell where one cell begins and one cell ends, so it's not a great picture. This is domain bacteria. You have these, I guess, kind of figure 8 shaped cells, and there's 2 of them shown here. That's okay, I guess. In the domain eukarya, you see some things that you recognize, like multicellular animals, plants, fungus, and then protists are generally unicellular. Some of the some fungi are unicellular, some are multicellular. So it depends on what type of fungus you're talking about. As far as I know, all the plants are multicellular and all the animals are multicellular. So in any case, you don't have to know that. But just within the domain eukarya, there are some organisms that are unicellular and some that are multicellular. So you will have to know that. On this slide, I introduce you to the idea of what we call the hierarchical organization of biology. And what this is, biology can be studied or broken down at different levels. And the smallest level of biology, I guess you could go down to the atom level. So this is really chemistry. At the atom level, we can study atoms. So a little bit about atoms. You may recall atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and we'll talk about this in chapter 2. And then if you have more than one atom joined together with bonds, it makes a molecule. And then really, really large, massive molecules are called macromolecules. And there are 4 main types of macromolecules, so we will learn those. At least in biology, there are 4 main types. And then different macromolecules, or maybe a bunch of the same type, come together to make little structures inside of cells called organelles. All the different organelles in a cell with a cell membrane make up a cell, and the cell is the smallest unit that's considered alive. I put this sentence down here at the bottom. A cell is the basic unit of life, or we could say it's the smallest unit that is considered alive. So organelles by themselves are not considered alive. Molecules are not considered alive. Atoms are not considered alive. So the cell, intact cell, is the smallest thing on this list that can be considered alive. Now, now go up to the next column here. When you have multiple cells of the same type working together and usually connected together, those are called tissues. Multiple tissues of different types come together to form organs. Multiple organs of different types make up organ systems, and all the organ systems together make up an organism. I know you may be thinking of human, but even plants have tissues, organs, and organ systems to make up the organism. So this is true for any multicellular organism. A unicellular organism, the cell is the whole organism. So for that organism, the cell, you skip right from cell to organism, and there aren't any, that organism doesn't have tissues, organs, or organ systems. But in any case, when you have more than one organism of the same type living in a certain area, it's called a population. You might have a population of squirrels in Garland and a population of the same type of squirrel in East Texas. Those would be two populations, but they can be the same species. Species has a particular definition, and it means like exactly the same type. And so you can have a group of certain type of squirrels in Garland and a group in East Texas somewhere, and those can belong to one species group. All of the species living, now we're back to living in one certain area, but the species of different types, like the population, you could have a population of squirrels, a population of a certain type of trees, a population of a certain type of grass, things in the soil. Those all make up the community. All the living organisms that live in a certain area make up the community. And then when you add the non-living items to that community, like water, rocks, climate, that makes the ecosystem. So community and ecosystem aren't that different, except ecosystem includes the things that are not alive. And then the biosphere is collectively all the ecosystems in the world. All right. And this is just a picture of the same, where we start with atom, and then in each of these, as you go across in this diagram, you're going up one level, but you're also zooming out. So you start with atoms, they look kind of big, but then you zoom out and you see a whole molecule, and then you zoom out even more and you see a giant molecule called a macromolecule. And then if you zoom out even more, you might see a whole organelle, a whole cell, a whole tissue, organ, and then go down here, organ system. I think they're going with a goose brain and all the neurons. So nervous system as their example. Organism, population would be all the geese in one particular area. Species would be the geese in different areas, could be all over the world. Community, we go back to that same one area, but now we include not only the geese, but the grass and the trees and the fish and anything else living. Ecosystem adds in the rocks and the precipitation and water and air and climate, and then biosphere is the world. So you're going to need to know these in order. So practice atom, molecule, macromolecule, organelle, cell, tissue, organ system, organism, population, species, community, ecosystem, biosphere. I will come back to this structure many, many times in this course. Remember that you get a little note card for the exam. So if this is something that's, you're nervous that you're going to mess it up, it can go on the note card, but in order. From smallest atom to largest biosphere. All right, divisions of taxonomy. I've already gone over the category called domain a little bit. That's the broadest, the biggest category. But within each domain, we subdivide those organisms into subcategories, and then we divide those into more subcategories. So we're organizing living organisms based on similarities and differences, unity and diversity. So domain is a big category. That's the biggest. And there are 3 domains on Earth: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And you know that bacteria and archaea have unicellular organisms and prokaryotic organisms. And eukarya have eukaryotic organisms and have some prokaryotic organisms and some eukaryotic organisms in that group. So, sorry, I keep saying that wrong. Some unicellular organisms and some multicellular organisms in that group. Gosh. All right, so the domain is the big category, but we also have the next category underneath that. The next smaller category is kingdom. So each domain contains many kingdoms, and organisms are placed into those kingdoms based on their characteristics. And each kingdom has many phyla, and so on. So phylum is the next category, and then class, and then order, and then family, and then genus, and then species. Species is the most specific. That's where the word species comes from. Well, they come from the same root, species and specific. So domain is the most broad, species is the most specific in our taxonomy list. So you need to know these in order. There is a sentence that you could learn or memorize or write down that has the first letter of each of these categories, and that will help you to keep them in order. And the sentence that I learned is, "Did King Philip come over for good spaghetti?" Did King Philip come over for good spaghetti? That helps you to keep these in order. Now you have to know that the D stands for domain, and K stands for kingdom, and P stands for phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. But these little sentences help you to keep the order, keep them in order, I should say. And just for fun, you don't have to memorize this. I put what humans are. Humans are domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Primate, family Hominidae, and then genus Homo and species Sapien, just to show you an example. There are 5 concepts that unify biology. We're going to touch on all of these throughout the course, and if you go on in biology, these are just very basic concepts of all of biology. But I would say if I had to pick one that is going to be super critical to us in this course, number 2, structure determines function. That's going to be a real, I would put that as the number 1 thing you're going to learn in this course. And some of these others are going to be emphasized more in other courses. All right, now we get to something. You don't have to take notes on this, just listen to what I'm saying. When I'm teaching biology, I have to teach with models. And models are diagrams, or in laboratory, they could be a 3-dimensional plastic object, or we probably won't, but you can use computer programs and simulations and math equations. The thing about models is they're intended to teach something, but you're not intended to extract too much meaning from other details. And that can be confusing because you're new to this, so you don't know what's supposed to have meaning and what isn't. So I give you this example. This is a model from a textbook of a human heart. And the model is meant to teach the flow of blood through the different chambers. So in the real diagram, the names of the chambers would be here. But you probably know that a human heart is not a square like this. So you immediately ignored that. You knew, because you had experience with the human heart, that this is not the shape of a human heart. They're focusing on one particular thing, which is these arrows, the flow of blood through the chambers. And so it's my job, when you're a student, you don't know, maybe you came from outer space and you don't know what a heart shape is. You might think that this is giving you meaning about the shape. And so it's my job as the teacher, when there are things that can be confusing like that, to point it out. All right, I have one more little tiny segment, and then we will wrap our chapter 1.